Thank you for joining us, and thank you for those people who join us live and those people who get the recordings afterwards. It's a delight to be doing this, and it's great to have Dr. Michael Cannell with me today, and his topic is sleep and aging, and which is a fascinating topic, and I've learned so much about it in the last year. Michael, would you like to just introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm an independent medical doctor with interest in holistic and complementary medicine, but I am still working as a GP locum, and I was a GP partner in St Albans until 2016. And so I'm very glad to be invited to give a talk.
Thank you, and thank you for coming. So first of all, let's start with the general topic: is how important do you think sleep is in cognitive decline?
It's one of many factors, but I'd like to believe that it's perhaps one of the most important. You know, lifestyle, diet, exercise, how you cope with stress, all these affect how our brains decline, and we want to try to prevent that as much as possible. We can't completely, but sleep must be one of the most important, and it's probably one of the forgotten jewels, forgotten, almost a secret. Even in my medical training and many doctors, it's hardly discussed, and in society it's hardly discussed.
It's quite extraordinary, isn't it, that it can be so forgotten like this?
Yes, yes. Now, there's some very important research in brain health and cognitive decline. Something I've discovered recently is the link with a healthy gut. As you know, perhaps from other speakers, the gut and the mind are very much interconnected through the nervous system, through the immune system, through the circulatory system, and even there was some interesting research looking at mice. I'm sorry to mention animal research, but they had mice that had Parkinson's disease, and Parkinson's disease can lead to dementia. They had abnormal bacteria in what we call the microbiome, and they transplanted their microbiome to healthy mice, and the healthy mice quite quickly developed Parkinson's disease, which proved the link between the inflammation in the gut, perhaps due to abnormal bacteria. You get inflammatory chemicals probably going up the vagus nerve, which is the big nerve connecting the deep parts of the brain to the gut, traveling up and then causing inflammation in the brain. So this is a fascinating link, which they're doing a lot more research on. And this just shows that the healthier gut we have, the healthier our brain will be. Now, that's just a sort of almost an aside, but it just emphasizes the importance of reducing the inflammation in our bodies. Now, the other exciting part of research is why sleep is so important, because sleep is where we integrate the new information that we've gathered during the day. It's all been put in sort of short-term storage. We have to put it into long-term storage. We have to integrate it. We have to jettison any rubbish. And talking about rubbish, the brain has a particular system called, which I've never heard of until recently, the G-lymphatic system, which is to remove toxins and inflammatory chemicals from our brain. Now, you may not have heard the lymphatic system. We have one in our body. We've heard of lymph nodes and glands. These are all lymph circulates in different vessels, nothing to do with veins. They have their own vessels. And we never knew until recently that we have the same system in our brain. The nerve cells have astrocytes, which are cells around the nerves, which provide nutrition to the nerves, but they also are linked to the G-lymphatic system to get rid of the rubbish. So we have to understand that this is what happens if we have good quality sleep, good length and good quality. This is when the rubbish is removed, a bit like a computer backing up. It's so important.
And what sort of sleep are you in when all this rubbish is removed?
I think other speakers, including yourself, have talked about the deeper parts of sleep, which we call
Yeah.
REM sleep. And as far as we understand, a lot of it is happening in this REM sleep. But it's not just the deep sleep that's important. The last few hours of sleep, I only discovered this from reading Michael Walker's book, which we've mentioned several times. But there's I think it's called a delta wave, which comes from the frontal lobe backwards, which like switches everything on. So gets ready for the day. So you don't want to get up too early. I used to have this habit of, oh, it's 5:30, I'm not sleeping, I must get up and do some work. And now in the last few years, I think, oh, actually, I could go back to sleep now. You know, I could just let the frontal lobe sort of recover and get ready for the day. So it's actually helped me to think about relaxing a bit more.
It's great. And I find this sort of washing your brain out as such a powerful thought, that you can actually get rid of the junk, because you sort of assume that it's sort of there to stay. But this is quite, I think this is quite exceptional. And did you come across the comment about your brain actually shrinking in order to let the fluid flow around it and move the junk out more easily?
Yes, we call this fluid the CSF, cerebrospinal fluid. So not only does it change shape, as Olive as you've said, to pump the fluid round, but there's also something called ventricles in the middle of the brain, which sound like ventricles of the heart, but they're sort of spaces or chambers. And for instance, as we exercise, they also change shape, which pumps the fluid around. So as we exercise, you're actually pumping this fluid around the brain.
It's quite remarkable.
And even our sleep position, according to my recent reading, if you sleep on your side more, then this seems to help to drain some of the toxins out, and it helps to clear out something called amyloid from the brain. And amyloid is mentioned if you read about Alzheimer's. Several chemicals can build up, one of which is called amyloid, beta amyloid. But apparently sleeping on your side can help clear it. Who knew? Who
knew that? And other psychological causes that can relate to poor sleep?
Well, I'm glad you've mentioned this, because I think it's something I've realized more and more, that not only obviously anxiety can, if you're worried about something, stress of the day, something's gone wrong, but there can also sometimes be a deep-seated fear that you can't let go. And there's something about letting yourself sleep, as we've discussed in an earlier recording. There's sleep as a natural rhythm. We don't have to develop it. It's there. The switch is already being activated, and we have to allow ourselves to sleep. So sometimes it's a matter of almost letting go. And that's a problem that some people might have if they've got maybe childhood issues, bereavement, control issues, safety issues, linked to depression. Those sort of things, obviously you need to talk to your GP, or think about mindfulness and CBT, which I think as other people have talked about, to help relax.
Yeah, and how does it connect with depression, do you think?
Well, anxiety and depression are very much linked. Often you can have both side by side, and any sort of bereavement or loss will affect it. And the difficulty as we move on to talking about Alzheimer's, which is the commonest form of dementia, it can be easily masked sometimes by depression. So if you take do memory testing and how good is their cognition, that depression can mask Alzheimer's. So you have to be aware, and if you've got Alzheimer's or cognitive decline and you've got some insight, you might well be depressed as well. And the other thing we must think about, and I think Martin Benfield has mentioned this about conventional prescriptions, that Antidepressants they can help you to sleep, but also they can have side effects. And there's this system in the body called anticholinergic, but I won't bore you with the details. But antidepressants can impede memory. That's the point. Because they can interfere with this system in the brain, the way of laying down memory can be impeded. So if there are alternatives to antidepressants, it's worth exploring. But of course, sometimes we do need them. We do need them sometimes.
And there's, Martin's talked about standard conventional sleeping pills, but you've got a really different take on that, I know.
Well, I think I would agree with him that they can be, you can get addicted to them easily. They tend to give you artificial type of sleep, not the proper deep sleep.
Yeah.
The quality of sleep will be interfered with. Nevertheless, sometimes, and I do prescribe them, sometimes you need a short-term, quick course of artificial sleep in order to get the body clocks working again.
Yeah.
Sometimes a bit like a plaster, you need to use conventional sleeping tablets for a short term. But of course, the long-term use is fraught with problems.
But you have a lot, you go down the vitamin route and mineral route, don't you?
Well, I think both as a GP and it's useful to know there are alternatives, because many people don't necessarily want conventional tablets. They just want help, and they want to know what other options there might be. And of course, there's quite a well-known treatment our mother or parent might have told us about having warm milk before you go to sleep. Now, there's real science behind this, because there's a protein in milk and in turkey and other foods, but it's particularly rich in milk, called tryptophan. And tryptophan is what we call an amino acid. Amino acid is like a building block of proteins. But this particular one, tryptophan, is very important because it's converted to serotonin and other chemicals in the brain which help to relax the brain. So have warm milk, and more milk also contains some magnesium as well, and that's another option. Many people in the population are deficient in magnesium, and it's not something that is very well tested for in the NHS. And magnesium is very much needed by the brain in terms of anxiety, in terms of depression, but also in terms of sleep and in terms of general brain function. So having extra magnesium is very, very important, and you can buy supplements as long as you want to get something like magnesium citrate. You don't want to get magnesium oxide, but it's also high in turkey. It's also high in lots of vegetables. It's high in almonds and cashew nuts. And then there's these other supplements or good things to have. For instance, green tea. Now, green tea contains a form of caffeine, so you don't want to have that, but you can have decaffeinated green tea. And green tea contains this substance called L-theanine, which is another amino acid. And that you can buy it as a supplement. It's perfectly safe, and it reduces stress, anxiety, and promotes sleep. Then you can get something else called melatonin, which I haven't often used, but it's used widely in America to help get the sleep back into a rhythm. And some people use it for jet lag. It's only used in the NHS in a limited way, tends to be with children who might be hyperactive or have sleep issues. But you can get it yourself through often the internet. There is one, I think, supplier in this country that sells a melatonin spray, Um, and that's very interesting because you have to realize the nose, the olfactory nerves in the nose, which are connected to the front of the brain, is a very ancient system going back to our Neanderthal man and going back to, you know, animals and mammals. The sense of smell is very fundamental and primitive, and it triggers deep centers in the brain. So anything given through the nose, and some people use essential oils, but going back to melatonin spray, it will quickly get absorbed and work on the parts of the brain which are involved with sleep, the sleep cycle. But again, don't have a great experience in its use. And the other thing is, going back to cognitive decline, we talked about magnesium being important. All the vitamin Bs are very important. Vitamin B12, vitamin B3, vitamin B1. They're all very much involved in helping to keep our brains in optimal health and therefore help to slow down cognitive decline. And vitamin B12 is one of the most important. And one reason it's so important is that the brain and nervous system needs very high amounts of it. And as we age, anybody over 50, you start absorbing it with greater difficulty. That's one big reason.
And there are some herbal ones, aren't there? I've talked to you before about dormicin, for example.
Yes, well, dormicin is a useful herbal spray which contains passiflora, I think is its main ingredient. I think it may have something else in it as well, but they are very good herbs, and dormicin do either drops, and I think that you can probably get a spray. Company Vogel make it, and it can be very effective. I think you've had some experience of it.
Yeah, we've used it when people have been ill in the family, and with great results. And it's the sort of thing you can just put a few drops in a glass of water, have a quick swig of it, and it just seems to calm your brain down.
Yes.
And especially if it's racing a bit.
Yes, yes.
And there's lots of other herbs that you're such an expert on herbs. Tell us about some of the other herbs.
Well, I'm not a herbal practitioner, but I have a great interest in herbs. There are registered herbal practitioners you can go to. But I've become very interested in Ayurvedic herbs, which are the herbs mostly found from India, southern India in particular. And a bit like Chinese herbs, they go back thousands of years, and they have a very good safety record, and there is more and more research being done on their effects on cognitive health. So I mentioned, for instance, there's one called Bacopa, Bacopa, and this is particularly helpful in people who are having trouble sleeping due to stress. It does increase acetylcholine, which is involved in memory, and so it can improve our cognition as well. But you have to take quite a low dose. There's other herbs like ashwagandha, which can also help to promote sleep. But I would advise you to see somebody who knows something about these, or at least you need to read up on them, because it's not necessarily something you should just buy over the counter in health food shops, although sometimes they give very good advice about them. But there's other herbs. Valerian is very useful to help you to sleep. Lemon balm is another one. Lavender as well is great relaxant. So there's a lot of these other helps available.
Things like lavender you can just use as a spray. I have a spray near my bed which is just a mixture of a few essential oils, and I just spray the bedclothes with it, and I find that really helpful. So that gets away from any worries about actually swallowing anything.
Yeah.
which is quite nice thing to do in the middle of the night.
And lemon balm, so many of these herbs have many properties. So for instance, lemon balm is also antiviral, antifungal, I think antibacterial as well. So a lot of them have affect our health in a very positive way in many different areas.
Are there any physical health issues that can affect sleep and so accelerate cognitive decline?
Yes, I'm very pleased that Dr. Martin Benfield has done a whole talk on obstructive sleep apnea. I myself discovered probably 15 years ago I had a mild form of it, and they reckon that 80% is undiagnosed. As he's described, it's where in the night your partner might notice it, but somebody almost stops breathing when they're in a deep sleep, and then they suddenly wake up with a startle. And during this period of time, your oxygen levels particularly drop, and that, of course, is not safe for too long. So the brain then wakes everything up because it's in an emergency mode, and generally you want to keep your oxygenation well up for health. And this is why in the past Olive's talked about nasal breathing and breath control and yoga practices that enhance better breathing, because it's the oxygenation of our system which is so fundamental. And then the other quickly mention, I'm afraid if one has obesity issues, which is not always an individual's fault at all. I think sometimes the food industry we need to blame the way they promote high calorie, high sugar foods through advertising, etc., etc. But obesity is an issue in affecting our mental health and cognitive and sleep. And alcohol taken particularly a few hours in the evening, it may initially promote sleep, but actually it's the wrong sort of sleep. It's a sort of disrupted sleep. Alcohols are toxins, so suddenly the liver and the brain have to detoxify when they're trying to sleep. So you sort of, it disturbs you. And then we mustn't forget that if you've got, as we age, your thyroid can go wrong. You might need thyroxine. You might develop diabetes, which you need insulin. And the other thing, which I must remember to emphasize, that women who go, as they go through the menopause, there's very good evidence that hormone replacement therapy not only can have many beneficial effects on the bones and the muscles, but also on cognition and memory. And this is something you need to talk to your doctor about, but it can be a lifesaver for some women who might get very depressed or anxious soon or around the menopause and wonder why. And HRT, hormone replacement therapy, might be a solution, one solution. And the other thing, which if you eat a meal late at night, a big meal, rich in carbohydrate, often it pushes your glucose, sugar levels up. Suddenly your insulin's released, and suddenly in the few hours in the night, your blood sugar levels can drop. And again, that's an emergency situation for the brain. So it wakes you up because your blood sugar's dropped, and therefore it can make you wake. It's because you had that big meal a few hours before you went to bed.
That's really something that people just don't take into account. All I can think of is those late night curries and stuff like that, full of rice. What about toxicity issues and brain health?
Yes, well, toxicity is often not talked about by doctors. I think they're beginning to learn about it, but it's something which mustn't be ignored. I mean, alcohol's a toxin. Some prescription drugs are toxins in the sense that they're foreign to the body, and your liver and kidney have to break them down and get rid of them. So it's just that your doctors need to be aware that some prescription drugs interfere with each other or affect the brain chemistry. And I talked about anticholinergic drugs, like antidepressants, you know, they can affect the memory. They can also might lead to glaucoma and other problems. So some of these drugs, hopefully you should be monitored on a regular basis by your primary care provider on terms of safety of prescription drugs. But there's other toxic issues. You know, if you've worked in a factory where they were using lead or other heavy metals, it could be pollutants that you've imbibed. If you've lived near a very industrial area, motorways, I'm afraid there are these toxic issues, and it all comes down to having a healthy lifestyle, trying to have lots of fresh air, keep yourself exercising, and it's really another topic, actually, Olive, talk about toxicity. It's really another subject.
And you mentioned toxicity about your bedding, and that really surprised me, because I never even thought of that.
Oh,
mattresses,
yes.
And sheets and pillows,
Yes.
and stuff.
Well, there are plasticizers in all sorts of things that we come into contact in modern life, and we hear on television all about what they're doing to the fish and animals in our world, but they're also affecting us, I'm afraid, as well. I mean, the other subject that's now hardly ever mentioned is molds. If you have any molds in the house, any dripping taps, any water damage, molds give off what we call mycotoxins, and they can also affect the brain health. So modern houses and modern living, I'm afraid, doesn't always go with health.
Well, that's true. Well, is there anything you'd like to round up on with Michael? You've done a really great talk. Thank you very much.
No, I just wanted to say that there's every, as we all get older, then there's every help that we can receive in trying to keep our brains healthy, and our GPs, I'm sure, will help us, although they're, as we know, very overworked at the present time.
And I think also it's never too late to start, because there's lots of these things that we've been talking about all day here in sleep that you can change. You can change some really simple things and have some great results.
Yes, and sleep must be one of the most important. Just to finish as I started, as it has to get rid of all the rubbish, it has to integrate all the new stuff, it has to repair the mind and body. That's what happens. If we sleep well, you're repairing everything. So if I finish with that, that's why sleep is so important.
And the measure is, what do you feel like when you wake up naturally?
Yes, that's right.
Bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. Thank you so much, Michael.
Okay, thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.